subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson we're going to take a look at drawing tools. Now we've used some of these already in this course, but I'm going to explain to you in a little bit more detail how they work. Now when you're putting together a drawing, quite often you're going to use shapes from your stencils. But it's worth remembering that you do always have an available set of drawing tools that can be useful to add squares, lines, circles to any drawing. So currently on the screen I have the course 05 drawing open on the screen, and what I ultimately want to do here is delete all of these shapes off of the page. Now before I do that I need to make a selection. So one way that I can select everything that I have on my page is to make sure that I'm clicked on my page and press the Ctrl-A keyboard shortcut. And Ctrl-A just really means select all. And then of course what I can do is press the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of all of those shapes. So now that we have essentially a blank canvas to work with, let's take a look at some of our drawing tools. And you'll find your drawing tools on the Home tab in the Tools group. And if we go up to this little icon just here where we have this blank rectangle and click the drop down, you'll see that we have 6 different drawing tools available. So I'm going to select the rectangle, and you'll see as soon as I do that, when I move my mouse back onto my drawing, the cursor is changed to a very small cross, and it's showing me a little graphical representation of the drawing tool that I've selected. So in this case, the rectangle tool. So all I need to do now is click and drag, and I can draw a rectangle of any size. Now you'll see that once I let go, if I drag my mouse around on the page, you can see that I still have that drawing tool active because I can still see that little icon. So if I want to draw another shape, I can simply carry on going. I don't have to reselect the rectangle tool. Now one thing you might notice is with these drawing tools, I don't have a square and I don't have a circle. Instead, I have a rectangle and an ellipse. So if I now wanted to draw a square, I would use the rectangle drawing tool, and when I drag, I need to hold down the Shift key, which is going to give me a square. And the same thing pretty much applies to if you're using the ellipse. You can see if I just drag, I'm going to get this oval shape. If I want a circle, hold down Shift when I drag, and it gives me a nice equal circle. Now because the cursor stays in drawing tool mode once you've finished drawing your circle, if you want to exit out of this mode and just go back to your regular cursor or your pointer tool as we call it, you can just jump back up to tools and select pointer tool, and then your cursor will be back to normal. Now with any of these shapes that you draw on the page, you can of course format them. So if I select this first rectangle and right click, I have a format shape menu item in my contextual menu. This is going to open up the format shape pane on the right hand side, and I can choose a fill color. So I'm going to say I want a solid fill, and I'm going to choose a color from the palette. So let's do a nice burgundy color, and the line controls the border of that shape. So again, if I want a solid line, I might say that I want a black border, and I'm going to change the width to 2 points. Click on the drawing and you can see that formatting applied. Now I'm just going to undo those changes that I've made and take it back to a regular shape. If I decided that I wanted to format all of the shapes that I currently have on my drawing, again, I need to select them all by pressing Ctrl-A. I can then use the Format Shape panel, and I can change all of them at the same time. Now we're going to be looking at formatting shapes and other items in a lot more detail later on in this course, but hopefully that gives you a better understanding of some of the basics. What I would recommend is that you now practice drawing some shapes on your page and maybe even utilizing some of the tools that we haven't used yet, such as the line, freeform, arc, and pencil. Have a little play around with that, see how you get on, and then when you're ready, you can join me in the next lesson. Hello everyone and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson we're going to continue on the subject of shapes, but this time I'm going to show you how you can select shapes. Hopefully by this point in the course you are comfortable with putting shapes on a page, and in Visio you may have dozens or hundreds of shapes on a drawing. And it might be that you need to select one or multiple at any given time. Now, it's a reasonably simple process to select an individual shape. We can simply click on the shape, and once we see those little handles, those resize handles around the outside, we know that that shape is selected. But if you have a lot of shapes on the page, it's a pretty inefficient way of selecting shapes. For example, if I want to change the background fill color of all of these shapes, I could go through selecting them all individually by holding down my control key and clicking my mouse, and that might work fine if I've just got a few on the page, but if I have a lot, particularly if those shapes are overlapping or they're quite small, that's a really inefficient and fiddly way of working. So I want to find a method of being able to select multiple shapes easily and then performing an action on all of them. So let's take a look at the different ways that we can make selections. So as we've seen, individual shapes can be selected by clicking, and then you can either hold down Control to select other shapes, or you can hold down the Shift key, which is going to do pretty much exactly the same thing. Now, one thing you might notice when I do this, if I just do that again, if I select these two shapes, you can see that I get a bounding box around the outside. If I now go and select the circle, that bounding box expands, and it kind of gives the impression that all of the shapes are included within this selection. But they're actually not. Only the shapes that currently have a blue border around the outside are the ones that I have selected within this bounding box. So this rectangle in the middle and this square I didn't select. And so whilst they look like they're part of the selection, they're actually not. So just be aware of that. So now I have those three shapes selected, I can right-click my mouse and go to Format Shape. And then if I want to, I can change these to a completely different color. So let's make those purple. Another way to select multiple shapes is to draw a rectangle around them. And again, this might be a method that you're used to using in an application like PowerPoint. Now to do this, you need to make sure that you have the pointer tool selected. So you don't want to have any of these drawing tools selected. Make sure your cursor is an arrow, click your mouse and then just drag a rectangle around everything that you want to select. So if I want to select everything, I can do that. And you can see that all of the shapes have that blue border showing me that they're all selected. Let's click away. If I draw a rectangle around just these top two shapes, it will just select those two shapes. Now, what if I want to use this method to select shapes that aren't necessarily next to each other? So if I want to select all of the purple shapes, currently that's a bit tricky for me to do using the bounding box because it's going to include those red shapes as well. Well, in this case, I could use the lasso tool. So you'll find the lasso tool on the Home tab all the way over in the editing group on the end. Click the drop down underneath Select and you can see that currently I have Area Select highlighted. So that's the one that I'm currently using. That's the rectangle box that I'm drawing round. But if I choose Lasso Select, I can then use that to make more specific selections. So this time I can draw a free-form shape around what I want to select. So I want just the purple shapes. So I'm going to draw all the way around the outside, join it up, and now only those shapes are selected. And just for fun, I'm going to right-click, format the shape, and then I'm going to change the background fill one more time to this blue kind of color. Now I'm going to go back to that select option and I'm going to change this back to Area Select. Now if I draw a rectangle again, and maybe I only select half of the rectangle below, you can see that the rectangle isn't included in my selection because I didn't draw the rectangle around the entire shape, only part of it. So anything that's not completely enclosed within that rectangle box is not included in the selection. Now you can change this if you want to through your Visio options. So let's jump up to File and down to Options. I'm going to go to the Advanced page and you'll find this under the Editing Options group. And it's this option just here, Select Shapes Partially within Area. So if I select this and click on OK, now if I was to draw and partially select the third rectangle, it's going to include that in my selection. Now, when it comes to things like cutting, copying, and duplicating shapes, that works how you would expect. And I would say if you are reasonably familiar with other Microsoft applications, you're not going to have too many surprises just here. So let's click on the circle, and I'm going to copy this circle by pressing Ctrl C, and then I'm going to press Ctrl V to paste it. And you can see that the pasted copy appears slightly offset from the original. I can then drag that and position it wherever I like. Let's undo Ctrl Z a couple of times. Now another thing I can do here is I can choose to paste my shape somewhere specific. So let's stick with our circle. I'm going to press Ctrl C to copy. If I click somewhere up here in my drawing and do Ctrl V, you can see it's going to paste wherever I'm clicked, and then I can move it into place. This time I'm going to select 3 different shapes by just dragging my rectangle tool around the outside. I'm going to do a Ctrl C again to copy, and this time I'm going to paste them onto a new page. So all the way down to the bottom of the screen, let's click the plus to insert a new page. And if I do Ctrl V, it's going to paste those shapes in exactly the same location as they are sitting on the original page. So that helps you achieve a level of consistency when you're copying and pasting shapes between different pages. Now, something else you might want to do instead of copying and pasting is simply duplicate a shape, particularly if you've made a lot of changes to the shape, formatting changes, and you want another shape that's basically exactly the same. Duplicate is a nice quick option. So let's take this rectangle at the top, and there's a couple of ways that I can duplicate. The quickest is to press the Ctrl D keyboard shortcut to give yourself an exact replica. Let's Ctrl Z to undo. The other way you can duplicate a shape is to hold down the Control key and drag and drop that shape, and it's going to give you an exact copy. So as I said, all of this functionality is pretty much standard across all of the Microsoft applications, but it's definitely something that you need to be familiar with in order to work efficiently in Visio 2019. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this course on Visio 2019. In this lesson, we're going to explore resizing and rotating shapes in a bit more detail, because these two types of operations can be particularly important. And I'm going to start out this lesson in a slightly unusual way. I'm going to start by issuing a warning. And I'm going to demonstrate the essence of the warning at the end of this section. And that warning is, when you use templates, it's possible that some of the shapes might be locked in some way. And I'll show you a bit later on how to recognize if a shape is locked. Now, a consequence of a shape being locked is that many things are restricted. For example, you can't resize a locked shape. Now, it might be that you receive a Visio drawing from a colleague or someone else, and there's nothing you can do about the fact that the shapes are locked. So you might just have to accept it. The alternative is knowing how to unlock shapes. Now, I just wanted to mention this right at the beginning of this lesson because it might be that you receive a drawing with locked shapes in it and you might be thinking that you're doing something wrong. So I just want to highlight to you that sometimes shapes are locked, which is going to prevent you from resizing, rotating, and basically doing anything with those shapes. So now we've got that warning out of the way, let's dive into speaking about resizing. Now, we've already explored this a little bit in previous modules. If I click on this first rectangle, you'll see I get those resize handles around the outside. And you might hear these also referred to as selection handles. And you can grab any of these handles and resize this shape. And remember, if you want to maintain the aspect ratio of the shape, use the diagonal handles in the corner to drag out, and it will resize accordingly. Now this time I'm going to select another shape. So I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to select the red square towards the bottom. Now remember, I only have 2 of those shapes selected within that bounding box. Now when I select multiple shapes, if I use these resize handles, that's going to resize both of these shapes. It doesn't resize anything else other than my selections that are contained within that bounding box. And resizing is pretty much as simple as that. Now, for the next part of this lesson, I'm going to need to make sure that I have the dynamic grid turned on. So up to the View tab, and in the Visual Aids group, just check to make sure that you have a tick in the dynamic grid box. Now, we've already seen how you can use the dynamic grid when it comes to resizing shapes. So if I select this red rectangle just here and I start to resize it, As soon as that rectangle is the same size as something else on that page, so in this case the green rectangle just above it, I'm going to get those dynamic grid handles. And the same thing with this circle. If I start to make that a bit smaller, as soon as it matches the dimensions of another shape that I have on my page, it's going to indicate that to me. So in this case, it is now the same size as the square. And what you'll probably find is that you use the dynamic grid for resizing a lot. So let's now take a look at some examples of rotating shapes. And you can see on my drawing here, I have a single shape. I'm going to select it, and you can see that right at the top, we have the rotation handle. And we've looked at this in previous lessons. I can click and I can drag it around in order to rotate this shape. Now, something that I haven't pointed out thus far is that if you look carefully inside the shape, you'll see a tiny little line going to another handle. And just to make this a bit easier to see, I'm going to format this shape so that it has a white background. So now that makes it a little bit easier. You can see that line moving towards a tiny circle in the middle. And that circle in the middle is essentially the center of rotation, or the pin as it's known in Visio. And when I rotate an object, I'm basically rotating around that pin. Now we're going to come back to this pin in a moment because it is very important. Now, something else I want to show you is if we jump up to the View tab, and in the Show group, I'm going to click on Task Panes, and I'm going to turn on the Size and Position task pane. And this opens up the Size and Position window. And this is a very useful window with positional information. So I can see the X and Y position, I can see the width of the shape, the height, the angle of rotation, which currently is 0 degrees, and the pin position, which currently is center. Now I'm just very quickly going to close this window by clicking on the cross in the bottom left-hand corner and show you a different way of accessing this information. You can see that when I have this shape selected, if you look down in the status bar, I can see the width, height, and angle information down here as well. Now, if you don't see these, then if you right-click on your status bar, you can customize the information that you're seeing. So I have all of these selected up here, width, height, length, and angle, so I can view this information without actually having to pull up that task pane. And what I can do is I can use this status bar, and if I click on where it says width, it's going to pop up that size and position window. And because I clicked on width, it's highlighting the width field. If I click on height, it's going to pop up the same box, but it's going to jump to the height field. Now, not only does this window give you information, it also lets you change the information as well. So I can change the height by clicking in the field, and I'm going to change this to, let's say, 2 inches. Hit enter, and you'll see that that shape has now resized. And because it's a square that I've drawn, it's going to maintain that aspect ratio and also modify the width. And what you'll see is if I click on this shape, pick it up and start to drag it around, the X and Y positions are going to change relative to where I've placed my shape on the drawing. If I grab the rotation handle and start to rotate it round, again you can see that that information is displayed in the size and position window. And if I wanted to, I could also manually set the angle of rotation. So let's say 35 degrees, hit enter, and it's going to rotate the shape accordingly. Now, we mentioned pin position a bit earlier on in this lesson. And just as a reminder, the pin is that little circle in the center. And it's basically the point that the shape rotates around. So currently in my size and position window, it's telling me that my pin position is center. Now, if I click in here and click the drop down, I have different positions for my pin. So if I select top right, for example, and then I rotate my shape, it's now going to rotate around a pin in the top right-hand corner. If I change it to, let's say, bottom left, it's going to rotate it around a pin placed in the bottom left-hand corner. So don't forget about these little options in the size and position window. Now let's take a look at one final thing before we finish up this lesson. I'm going to introduce a second shape. So let's jump back to our Home tab. I'm going to grab the Ellipse drawing tool, and I'm just going to draw an oval shape. Now, what would happen if I was to select both of these shapes? So let's hold down Shift and click on the square. We can see that the size and position window is just showing the information for the ellipse. But what if I was to jump into here and let's say change the height to 4 inches and hit enter? It changes both of the shapes because that's what I have selected. If I change the angle of rotation, so let's change this to 60 degrees, again, it's going to rotate both of the shapes. So you can essentially use this size and position window to set values for multiple shapes at the same time. So the final point I want to mention, and we are leaping ahead a little bit now, but I think this is important for you to know at this stage, and that is dealing with locked shapes. And I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of this lesson as a bit of a warning. So let's take a look at an example. I'm going to undo a few times just to reset these shapes back to how they were. Now, as we've already mentioned, if I rotate this shape, I have my pin position set to center center, and this is allowing me to rotate round that center pin position. I can also freely resize this shape. So currently, this shape doesn't appear to be locked, as I can perform these different actions on it. Now, in order to demonstrate locking to you, I need to make sure I turn on the Developer tab. Now, you may or may not have this turned on. I currently don't, which is why you can't see it as one of my tabs running across the top of the screen. And I would say in general, Developer isn't turned on by default, but it's simple enough to do. Let's jump across to the File tab, go down to Options, and we need to select the Customize Ribbon page. And on the right-hand side, this shows all of the tabs that we have enabled in Visio. And if you take a look 3/4 of the way down this list, you can see that we have Developer with no tick in the box. So let's tick this and click on OK. And the Developer tab is now showing at the top of the screen. Now there's lots of different things on this Developer ribbon. We're not going to look at most of them right now, but I do want to draw your attention to this Shape Design group, because that is where we will find our protection option. So this is essentially how you can lock a shape to prevent it being changed. And you have all these different things in here that you can choose from. So all of the different things you want to be able to protect. So I want to protect this shape from having its width, height, X position, and also rotation changed. And if I click on OK, what you'll now notice is that those resize handles now have a little line through them. So it's kind of like a no entry sign, basically telling me that this shape is locked and I can't resize it. And if I try and do any resizing, you'll see that that's not possible. You'll see that I can't move this shape from left to right because I've locked it, but I can move it up and down because the only thing that I left open was the Y position. So X is locked, I can't move it side to side, but Y, I can move it. So essentially you can choose to lock the entire shape, or you can lock specific elements to prevent anyone else from changing the shape. So that is locking, and I would say if you receive a Visio drawing and you see shapes that have these kind of handles around the outside, then you will find that you're limited in what you can do with that shape. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. By this point in the course, you should be reasonably fine with moving shapes around, resizing them and rotating them. So we're now going to move on to another important task, and that is connecting shapes together. So in this first demonstration, I'm going to show you how to connect shapes together that isn't particularly good. And then I'm going to show you some better options. So what I want to do here is I want to connect these two shapes, the square and the circle, using a straight line. So let's take a look at a method that works but isn't particularly the most efficient. So let's jump up to the Home tab, and I'm going to go to my drawing tools and I'm going to select Line. And watch what happens when I drag my mouse close to the square. Connection points pop up on each side of that square. And if I hover over one, I get that green square and it says glue to connection point. So let's click and drag towards the circle. As soon as I get near the circle, again, I get connection points. So let's connect it up to this one. And I'm going to say yes, glue to connection point. So essentially, this is now glued at both ends. Now there is a big advantage to this, and that is if I was to move this circle then the line is going to move with it because it's glued to its connection point. And the type of glue that we've used here is referred to as static glue. Now there's one important aspect to this. If I click on the line again, you can see that at each end we have different coloured dots. So the one that's attached to the square is a solid green circle, whereas the other one is a white circle with a green dot in the middle. And this indicates two different types of glue that are being used. Now I'm going to delete out this line just by pressing the delete key, and I'm going to do this process again, but this time I'm going to do it wrong. So let's grab our line drawing tool, let's grab at a connection point, but this time instead of gluing to a connection point, I'm just going to glue to the outline of this circle. And you can see when I hover over the outline, not on a connection point, I get that little screen tip that says Snap to Geometry. So let's let go. So now my shapes are essentially only glued at one end because they're glued to a connection point on the square, but I just snapped to the geometry on the circle. So now if I was to move this circle, the line doesn't move with it because I've just snapped it. But if I move the square, the line does travel with it because it's glued at one end. And if I want to very quickly glue this circle back to the line, if I pull the circle over, I just need to make sure that I connect where I have that green square. And now it's glued at both ends. Now, whilst using glue is a really great way to connect two shapes, it does have its problems. So let's add in another shape. I'm going to add a triangle this time. And I'm going to delete out this connection line and place the triangle in the middle. Now I'm going to have a bit of a problem here because I want to connect the square to the circle, but the triangle is in the middle. So essentially I would need to go through that triangle. So we need to work out a way to draw around an obstacle. Now we're going to do this using something called connectors, but before we do, let me show you a bad way of doing this. So if I want to connect the square with the circle and avoid the triangle, I could choose to use a freeform line. So let's jump back up to our drawing tools and select freeform. So what I could do here is I could glue to connection point and then kind of drag around the triangle and connect to the circle. So that kind of works, but it is a little bit messy looking. It's not going to be good if you're trying to put together a professional looking diagram. It is also worth noting that with this freeform tool, you can see that we also have little connection points running along this line. And if I use my pointer tool to select it, I can move this line in and out to make further adjustments. Now what you'll see with this is that if I move the circle, the line is going to move with it, but at a certain point of moving this round, that line again is going to crash into that triangle. Now what I could do is I could make a modification and just drag it up so that it still avoids that obstacle. But all in all, this isn't a great way of doing this. It looks pretty messy and not very professional. So let's take a look at a much better way of circumnavigating obstacles. So let's delete out this line, get rid of that, and just move our circle back again and move our square up. So this time I'm going to use something called a connector. And again, you'll find this up in the Tools group on the Home tab, just below the pointer tool. So now, if I hover close to the square, I can click, drag, and connect to a point on the circle. And that point can be any one of these connection points. So let's say this one, glue to connection point, and you can see that Visio has intelligently worked out a route around the obstacle in the middle. And because we've glued, if I move this object down, it's going to move that path and work out the best route. Now, most of the time, Visio does a pretty good job at avoiding any obstacles, or if you do come across an instance where you want to move this line manually, then you can definitely do that as well, simply by dragging and dropping. Now at this stage, if I was to delete out this triangle so there's no longer an obstacle there, Visio doesn't automatically change this connector so it's taking the shortest possible route. I would need to change that manually. So because I'm just essentially joining two objects together, I don't really need this crazy route that it's taken. So I could drag it down and make that a little bit neater, or I could just delete the line entirely and basically start again. So select my connection point like so. Now let's delete out this connector once again. And I've still got the connector selected, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag a line, but I'm not going to connect to one of the connection points. I'm going to connect to a different point on the circle. And you'll see as I hover over the border of the circle, it says glue to shape. So I've glued this connector to the shape as opposed to a connection point. And this is what we call dynamic glue. I could do this going the other way as well. So let's grab another connector. I'm going to click on a connection on the circle this time. I'm going to drag across towards the square. And you'll see that as soon as I drag away from that connection point, the entire square goes green. So at this time, I'm gluing to shape as opposed to a connection point. Let go. And then when I drag these around, they move with the shape. So now essentially I have two shapes connected using dynamic glue. As I drag these objects around, Visio adjusts those connection points at each stage. Now the final point I want to mention here before we leave this lesson is our glue options, because if we're going to be doing a lot of gluing, it's important to have these set correctly. So let's jump up to View and into the Visual Aids dialog box. And the column that I want to draw your attention to is this final column here, Glue To. Now, if you think you're going to be using dynamic glue and static glue a reasonable amount, you want to make sure you have shape geometry and also connection points selected in this column. That's it for this lesson. I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In this very short lesson, we're going to discuss one other topic about shapes before moving on to a different subject, and that is shape replacement. Now, this feature was introduced in Visio 2013 to cover situations where you have a shape in use in your drawing and you want to change it to another shape. Now, that sounds like a fairly simple thing to do, but believe it or not, it used to be the case that you would have to delete out the current shape and then insert a new one. So in this lesson, all I really want to show you is how you can change shapes in your diagrams. So for this, we're using our favorite office layout drawing. And maybe I want to change this waste paper bin to maybe a different type of waste paper bin, maybe a plant, maybe something else entirely. So essentially what I want to do here is I want to replace the shape. So all I need to do here is select the shape, jump up to the Home tab, and all the way over in the editing group on the end, you can see an option there for change shape. And the first thing that's going to pop up is the Office Accessories stencil. So this is essentially the stencil that the particular object that I've got selected is part of. And the good thing about this is that this is a live preview. So if I want to get an idea as to what this plant is going to look like, I can hover over, or maybe a square bin instead of a round bin. Now, if I want to choose a shape from a completely different stencil, if I click the drop down underneath Office Accessories, you can see I have access to cubicles, office equipment, office furniture, so on and so forth. I can even choose to select something from my quick shapes, so anything I've saved into there. And also I could choose to pull up just the shapes in use in this document. Now for this, I'm going to go back to Office Accessories, and I'm going to change this round waste bin to a square waste bin. Now, much like any other shape, I can also change multiple shapes at the same time. So these three plants that we have in the middle of the office, I can select all three by holding down my Shift key, go to Change Shape, and then I can choose to change all three of them to something else. So let's choose a flowering plant just here instead. Click, and all of those shapes are changed at the same time. That's it for shape replacement, short and sweet. I'm going to head over to the next lesson now, and I look forward to you joining me.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get 4 free courses in Excel, QuickBooks, Microsoft Project, and Photoshop, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.